Hello and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole. The show must go on. This week, we're taking to the stage as we consider the future for global theatre in the midst of a global pandemic. Can the performing arts survive in a socially distant world? We'll speak to the director of Madrid's Teatro Real. The British government has promised close to $2 billion to get the industry back on its feet, but will that be enough? And even as some theatres start to reopen, we'll find out whether audiences are ready to go back into the auditorium. To say the world of the performing arts has been devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic is something of an understatement. Social distancing has made business as usual impossible for theatre companies around the world. Broadway's shutdown in New York in early March was a sign of what was to come, with London's West End following suit on March the 16th, after the government issued advice to avoid large gatherings. Since the beginning of the year, the curtains have been closed at theatres, opera houses, concert halls, ballet schools, even comedy clubs, bringing a multi-billion-dollar global industry to a complete standstill. In the UK, a statement from the Society of London Theatres said that theatres will be closed until further notice, but some won't be raising the curtains again. And it's not just the day-to-day performances that have fallen victim to COVID-19. Major international arts festivals like the Edinburgh Fringe, the annual Wagner Festival in Bayreuth, and even the once-in-a-decade Passion Plays in Oberammergau have had to be cancelled or postponed until next year. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people employed in theatres around the world have been made redundant, and billions of dollars in global box office revenues have been lost. And that's before we factor in the billions more that theatregoers spend on food, travel, and other tourist activities on a night out. The UK government has led the way globally in its attempts to help the industry back on its feet, promising $2 billion in extra funding for theatres, museums and galleries. It's been described as the biggest ever one-off investment in British culture. But it stops short of allowing indoor theatres to reopen. That's considered a step too far in these socially distanced times. The case for emergency support is compelling. The creative industries have been growing faster than any other sector of the UK economy, contributing nearly $150 billion in 2018 by attracting more than 34 million visitors. In 2019, the audience in London theatres alone was 15.3 million, nearly a million higher than New York, establishing London as the world's leading theatre destination. But even if theatres were to open, the financial outlook is still pretty bleak. The cost of a production is the same whatever the size of the audience, and the average theatre needs to play at well over 50% capacity just to break even. Some theatres, including Milan's La Scala and Madrid's Teatro Real, have already reopened, but only to smaller, socially distanced audiences. So it's hard to see how they can get back into profit. The concern now is that while the big theatres will no doubt survive, from London's West End to Broadway, from Paris's Comédie Française to Sydney's Opera House, smaller, more experimental spaces will not. And that can only mean fewer opportunities for the next generation of artistic talent and a far poorer cultural world. One of the first opera houses to reopen in Europe was the Teatro Real in Madrid. And joining me now to find out how it survived the pandemic and how it'll operate going forward is the theatre's Director General, Ignacio García-Belenguer. Welcome to The Agenda. What was lockdown like for the theatre? How did you survive?
It was easy to take the decision because it was just saying to everybody, you have to go home. So the decision is just to say four words to everybody. But at the same time, it was really hard because it was to put the end to the opera that was in the stage. We were working for Achilles in Israel, and it was to take the decision that we have to lock down, to close everything, to leave the theater, and it is hard for your heart. But the decision is easy to make because the government say that we have to do it, that we have to go home, so we have just to do it.
And you were also one of the first opera houses to reopen in Europe. How easy was that decision, or how hard was that decision?
First of all, we create a medical expert committee with very well-known doctors with a lot of experience in relation with this pandemic. And they really gave us some kind of recommendation about how to do it. Because I'm not a doctor, people that work here in Teatro Real, we are not people specialized in medicine. So we thought that we had to have a medical committee to advise us about how to do it.
And how have the audiences reacted so far? I'm just wondering what kind of changes you had to make to the experience.
So I will tell you that the audience is wonderful. It's really polite. It's really respect about the measures that we have to take into effect in Teatro Real. They are trying all the time to collaborate with the Teatro Real staff about the indications, and they want to come here to enjoy the opera, and at the same time they try to be very very conscious about the situation to make everybody enjoy the opera.
And the performers, because the performers they always guarded their health very carefully, but how have they reacted to all the social distancing and the rehearsals?
The singers are the best. I think that they really wanted to come back to the States. It's a way to contribute to recuperate the normality, this new normality.
And financially, how are you faring? Because I don't know if the Teatro is completely independent or whether or not the government has helped you. The government in Britain, as you know, has just handed over more than $1 billion.
We have to cancel around 15 operas, so 15 performances. So to close a theater during 4 months is really hard. The income really has decreased because our financial model comes from the subscribers, from the public, and from the audience, and we receive only around 20-25% of the subvention from the public administration. So that is not so much. But we feel really confident about the situation. We are sure that the situation is going to improve in the close future. And we feel really confident with the governmental help, with the sponsors, with the donors, and with the subscribers, and with the audience. And we feel that all together we'll put again the Teatro Real on the top.
You're a member of Opera Europe, and you're also on the board of Latin America Opera. Has the world of opera been coming together to cooperate, to take you forward?
Yes, really. We had a lot of meetings during these 4 months just to share ideas, to collaborate, to think together how to reopen. We all fight for the opera. We all fight for opening the opera houses again. So we really discuss, really talk together, and we really share experience, because the situation in each country was really different from the north and in Sweden or in Germany or in Spain or in Italy. With the pandemic situation was really different. So we share our experience together, trying to put our ideas in common to work for the future.
You've been streaming a number of your performances online. Is that where you could pick up a new audience, perhaps?
Yes, sure of it. Really, we have a website on demand, My Opera Player, and we had in around couple months around 50,000 new subscribers, so that's a lot. We had around people that show 1 million operas in our website. We have an agreement with the NCPA Theater in Beijing, and we have some operas and concerts from the NCPA Theater. in Beijing. And so we have new audience from China, we have new audience from Latin America, from Europe, and also from Spain. So it's a new way to make opera closer to the public.
Ignacio García-Belenguer, CEO of Teatro Real, many thanks for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
So some theatres across Europe have been able to reopen, but many arts festivals have had to be cancelled, including one of the world's largest, the Edinburgh International Festival. With me now is the director of the festival, Fergus Linehan. Fergus, you cancelled the festival. How difficult a decision was that?
It was a very difficult decision. I mean, we did it relatively quickly. We cancelled on the 1st of April, and that was a great advantage, actually. But we realised that there's particularities about what we do, which is not just about putting people in theatres, but also putting people on planes and bringing audiences from all over the world. So it was as much to do with the particulars of an international festival as just the difficulties that the performing arts are facing. What
are the financial implications for you of closing down the festival this year?
Well, there was about £4 to £5 million in revenue that disappeared. And what we've done is we've made a commitment to all the artists that were in our 2020 programme to perform in 21. So we've been working very hard to fundraise and figure out how we can manage costs. So I think that it's not just in relation to 2020. I think it's trying to think about what's coming in 21 and 22. And if we do re-emerge in 21, how things might be different, both in terms of funding and ticket sales, and trying to chart a course through that.
How has the city reacted to the cancellation? Because it's not just you holding festival, there's a famous Fringe as well. These must be huge losses of revenue to Edinburgh.
Overall, Edinburgh's festivals bring in revenues of about £300 million each year. So it's going to be very, very sorely felt. And I think that it's something unique maybe to this particular festival is that the arts play such a critical central role to the economy of the city. We want to make sure that we are back and ready to go as soon as possible. And hopefully that's going to be August 21.
Are you able to offer audiences anything else than live performances?
Well, what we've been working on at the moment is trying to give people a sense of what we would have been doing. There's been an explosion in terms of online and broadcast capture of the live performing arts. And we've commissioned a whole range of films where what we've been trying to do is to bring ensembles of dancers and musicians and actors back into the theatres, because they've been, like all the rest of us, banished to their bedrooms and kitchens, and bring them back together to create specially commissioned films, which will give a sense of what we would normally do, whether it's in opera or orchestral music or theatre or dance.
Have you been talking to festival organisers in Europe, getting their ideas, seeing how they're reacting to this pandemic?
Yeah, and obviously there's different approaches in different countries, and different countries have been affected in different ways. But of course, everyone's eye is towards next year, and also towards how, as organisations, we can help the festival ecosystem, because it's not just our organisation. There are lighting hire companies and sound hire companies and stage managers and taxi drivers who are reliant on the festival, and seeing what we can do to create activity that will support that ecosystem. Because one of the great concerns is that we can come back, but that all of the venues and all the support mechanisms to make a festival like this happen aren't as secure as they should be.
Fergus Linehan, many thanks to you for joining us on The Agenda.
Thanks for having me.
Still to come here on The Agenda, they'll be back, but what will the theatrical experience be like post-lockdown? We'll be speaking to award-winning actor and director Simon Callow. Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now. So, as we've heard, the British government's rescue package for the arts has been well received. But even that huge figure, is it enough to save the industry? And how exactly will the money be spent? Well, with me now is actor turned politician and chair of the UK Parliament's all-party group on theatre, Giles Watling. Giles, $1.5 billion on the arts. It's gone down very well, as I say. But is it enough to rescue British theatre from the pandemic?
No, frankly, it's not. But I'm not talking just about money here. What we need now is a sense of timing so the theatre can get back to work. The money is very welcome. We're all very grateful for it, and I fought very hard to get it, the £1.57 billion. But we now need to make sure it cascades down right through the business, right down to the grassroots. What really concerns me are the provincial and regional theatres, which typically have to survive on very high percentage audience turnover. So the little theatre I used to run in Frinton, for instance, many years ago, would have to operate at between 85 and 87% attendances in order to break even. So if you've got social distancing in a theatre, which is the way forward at the moment, you would have to sort of halve the audience, and these theatres can't survive. So that's where I'd like to see the money go. But now I've got a meeting coming up with Oliver Dowden, and we're going to be discussing exactly how we're going to distribute this money. As I said in Parliament, Rome is burning. Theatres are closing all over the country. People are being laid off. And if we don't get the pantomime season, which is vital for so many theatres across the country, if we don't get that, they're going to lose their annual income. Typically 80% of a regional theatre's annual income comes from its pantomime. And those decisions happen at the beginning of August, and we're very nearly there.
It's a lot of money to go to the performing arts. Why does the government think the performing arts is so important?
Well, the case I made repeatedly in Parliament and in meetings with ministers is simply this. The theatrical offer that the UK has is unique. We've exported Britain's values to the world through British theatre. I personally toured the world and took classic British theatre to corners of Malaysia and the Middle East, out to China. I worked at the English-speaking theatre in Vienna. We are respected since the time of Shakespeare. It is one of our major selling points. It's our big cultural offer. And on the back of that, you can sell Tetley tea to Brazil. It's what we are. It defines us. It's much more than just people standing on stage and entertaining. It's community. It's all of that. It's mental health, and it's an export to the rest of the world. Lastly,
Giles, has the nature of live entertainment changed for the foreseeable future, do you think? I'm stopping myself from saying forever.
Well, I sincerely hope, Stephen, that it's not forever, and I don't think it will be. The willingness is there, and once we have a vaccine, which it looks like we're moving towards very rapidly, far quicker than anybody ever imagined, and we begin to get more effective treatments, then it's entirely possible we'll be back, and this will just be a bad memory, a year and a half of bad memory. But I reckon it'll be a year, maybe more.
Giles Watling MP for Clacton, many thanks to you for joining us here on The Agenda.
Pleasure.
For actors and directors, a socially distanced world creates all kinds of new challenges. So how are they going to deal with a new approach to rehearsals and, of course, to performance? Well, joining me now is the award-winning actor, director and writer, Simon Callow. Simon, the government has announced this new $1.57 billion emergency support package for the arts. How has that been received within the acting community?
Oh, with huge relief, of course, initially. Naturally, it's a gesture, a very big gesture. It says that the arts matter, that they are economically important, that they deserve consideration. That's all fantastic. How it actually is going to pan out is another matter. We all await, with bated breath. clearly, for the most part, the money is going to go to organizations. And that's good because in the end they engender the work, they engender parts for actors, jobs for directors, jobs for designers, and all the makers of all the elements that make up theatre. But of course it doesn't exactly address the rather critical current situation of the self-employed, which includes almost all actors and almost all directors.
The money, as you say, will be well received. It'll be spread pretty thinly across the whole of the performing arts. But theatres still can't open. And that's the real problem, isn't it?
And what has been terrible is the theatres have been closed and have had no income. That has been almost equally terrible because the danger is that everything that has been built up dissolves and disappears because, you know, these are human organizations built on people above all. And if those people aren't able to work, they'll have to find work elsewhere. And the danger is that all the wonderful tradition and continuity of work that has been built up over so many years will be wasted. However, I and everyone is doing their absolute best not to be in any way pessimistic about this. I think we need to embrace it, to be grateful for it, and then to figure out, as you suggested, the ways we can get theatres opening and functioning. That's a really grave question, both for performers and for audiences. How close can we be to each other? And closeness is the very thing that the theatre aims for. Unlike the recorded media, what we're trying to do is to create a sense of community and identity within an audience and within the players on stage. And to be physically separated, well, in the case of musicians, it's an almost impossible thing for a large physical separation. I mean, it's now 1 meter, and that makes it just about possible, I think, for a small orchestra to play together. But in case of acting performances or ballet or opera, there's a physical contact is one of the most crucial things and the most expressive things.
Exactly. This is what I want to know. If you can sort of sum up in a way, sort of how important an audience is to an actor's performance.
The great Max Wall used to say at the end of his act, he used to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. You have been 50% this evening." They're 50% of the event. You know, that's what it is. It's them and us. And we hope, every actor and performer hopes that we will affect the audience in some way, but we also hope that they will affect us. So it's an interchange. Every single performance, it can't be more sufficient. It can't be sufficiently stressed. Every single performance in a live theatre is one-off. It's its own thing. It's just that night, that afternoon, what happened in the theatre that time between that particular audience and us as the players. That's why we're there.
How will the performance change? You won't have a front row probably because you can't get too close to the actors.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think almost everybody in my profession and many musicians and many dancers and singers will not be unfamiliar with not entirely full audiences. We've all been there. And that's
all played to a half-empty matinee house then.
Yeah. Sometimes they're the best performances ever. Any actor will tell you that. Sometimes they're very relaxed and they're very intimate because people are not quite so jammed up tight together. So I think that's not a major problem. I mean, that will, also change. I think bit by bit
But what about scenes? What about scenes that require a degree of intimacy?
No, that's another whole matter. However, it's also worth observing that our current touchy-feely-ness is fairly recent. We've all seen movies of the 1940s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, where people don't really touch each other very much at all. And all the electricity is engendered by the fact that you can't touch, that you long to touch, that you want to be in touch with another person. And that is something that we may have to work around and adapt. I mean, the whole tendency of theatre since the war has been towards a more physical theatre, where people are very physically free and very physically exposed and open. But the theatre before that was not like that at all. And it was nonetheless sexy, nonetheless exciting, nonetheless powerful and expressive. So we're going to have to re-explore some of those older theatrical modes. Well, I don't think we should hope to stay that way, but it certainly may provide a useful transitional approach.
Theatre in Britain has survived plagues before. It survived the Puritans, didn't it, during the Civil War? It survived the Second World War. So I'm sure you'll be pretty confident the theatre will survive this pandemic. Yeah,
I'm absolutely certain that the theatre started in caves in the far distant almost prehistoric past, and it answers a very basic need, which is to have stories played out for you. There's nothing more compelling or attractive, but it's always stories we're telling, and there's never going to be a time when people don't want to hear stories from people the whites of whose eyes they can actually see. That they want to feel that they're in the presence of somebody who is actually talking very directly to them. And I sort of repeat myself a little bit, but you forget that the thing about television and TV is that you can't change anything in the actors' performances at all. That's it. They're fixed for all time. They may be, wonderful performances. They may have every appearance of spontaneity, but they're never going to change. It happened. It's historic. What happens in the theatre is present. It's now. It's something that proves to ourselves that we're alive, we're engaged and connected and can interchange with each other. That's the glory of the theatre. That's what it's all about.
Simon Callow, thank you very much for joining us here on The Agenda.
Thank you. A great pleasure.
Europe's theatres have endured crises before. In the 17th century, outbreaks of plague closed theatres across the continent, including the famous Globe in London. Today, Europe's singers, dancers and actors are in a pause that even Harold Pinter might have thought a tad lengthy. The spotlights went off in February and March, and few believe they'll be on again soon. Some famous houses, including La Scala in Milan, have reopened, although with less than a third of its usual audiences to allow for social distancing. Here in London, though, one of the UK's most famous theatre impresarios, Cameron Mackintosh, has cancelled all his shows until at least 2021. Britain's theatres were the liveliest in the world, with more than 5,000 productions a year, generating more than $1.5 billion in box office revenues alone, billions more in ancillary tourist activities. But as government-enforced closure continues, about 2/3 of UK theatres risk going bust by Christmas. They'd need to sell 80% of tickets for every performance just to break even. And that is incompatible with social distancing rules, even if the government lifted its ban on live performances. But perhaps there is some brighter news for the theatre world. It's thought William Shakespeare used his own plague lockdown in the 17th century to write some of the most famous plays in the English language. Not only Antony and Cleopatra and Romeo and Juliet, but also King Lear and Macbeth. The UK government's rescue package for the arts has drawn much applause and calls across the rest of the world for other administrations to follow suit. But the truth is, the bailout for Britain's theatres won't necessarily mean that the show really does go on. Coming up on a future agenda, what are we drinking? What does the future hold for the multi-billion-dollar alcohol industry? Don't forget, for more agenda content, you can visit our website or you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.